You crashed. You gave me a Grand Prix, David.
Stop rubbing it in. I think everyone understood I crashed. You don't have to say it three
But I'm
times.
just saying-
For me, it was just a hobby that became a career.
That's quite obvious to me anyway, David.
Yeah. Whenever I've seen him be interviewed, he doesn't necessarily come across like he's the brightest bulb in the... I'm going to get sued here.
Lewis is a phenomenal talent. Has the phenomenal talent survived 40 years? I'll never see this die if I do an animal impression on this.
Hello and welcome to Formula for Success. I'm David Coulthard. And once again, sadly, we have no Eddie this week, but he's very kindly sent us a very special guest in his place. It's one of his former drivers. He survived that one. It's one of my old teammates, and I think we survived that pretty well together. It's former Formula One world champion, Damon Hill. Good morning, Damon.
Morning, David. And yeah, I know I'm not sure I could ever fill a spot for Eddie, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, well, you're still doing him favours after all these years. He's got a way of getting you to do things where you're never actually quite convinced whether he's financially gaining out of it when you know you're not.
Yeah, no. You are convinced. You know he's funny. You know he's always going to come off better. There's some. Anyway, we both know Eddie quite well from a very long time. So it's been fantastic to have Eddie in our lives. But wishing him well, of course, and all the family. But it goes back with me right to Formula 3, right to the very beginning. So he was the man around when I was coming into the sport, and one of the guys you had to kind of get to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally echo what you're saying there about we're sending him all the best as he continues his journey. He obviously shared with our listeners and the wider world his personal difficulties on the cancer trail, but he's a fighter, and we look forward to him fighting his way through that. So get us back then to take us there. Take us right back to those early days when you mentioned Formula 3. You of course started on two wheels, as we know from the last time you were on the show. I guess out of either safety or opportunity, you found yourself going to the world of four. As I understand, you started in Formula Ford, so you wouldn't have come across Eddie until your F3 days. But was it pretty much Formula Ford into F3, or was it Formula 2000 at that time as well?
Yeah, well, as you know, David, my career was like a kind of advice book on how not to do it. It was absolutely. I started in the wrong place. I started in Formula Ford 2000. I couldn't drive those things. I even drove the wrong car. I drove a car that's the most difficult one to drive. And so my introduction to the sport was inauspicious. And I had to kind of rewind and go back to the beginning and did Formula Ford, as you say. And then you meet all these characters, because I wasn't familiar with paddock at all. I mean, I've not done karting like you had. I've not known motorsport people. It sounds a bit strange to say that because my dad was in motorsport, but I'd been away from it for car racing anyway for a long time. And then eventually these people appear into your life, and you kind of work out that there's a route up. And one of the route ups would have been to go with the same team that Ayrton Senna went with, West Surrey Racing and Dick Bennett's. And then you suddenly realize there's loads of New Zealanders in Formula 3. There's all these people who've come across to go, and people from all over the world who used to come to the UK to race. And Eddie had come from Ireland, not as far as New Zealand, but he'd come and he'd set up his team, and he'd got reputation, and he was angling for any driver with cash and speed. That was the criteria. If you had cash, that was a good thing. He'd take that, but... and so I got a test with him. He gave me my first, and he in his version of events, he gave me the test of my life. The opportunity of a lifetime. And actually, I seem to remember I paid, something like it seemed like a lot of money in those days. So I think it was $2,000 for 20 laps. Maybe it's 20 grand. I can't remember. It was a lot of money. It seemed to be in the day. And then he's never let me forget it.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, the fact that your journey, and as far as I recall, it's only yourself and your other former teammate, Jacques Villeneuve, of recent times, when I say recent times, the last 30 years, that...
it's not so recent, is it?
Yeah, I know, but time passes quickly, doesn't it? All those young kids listening to this will think, oh my goodness, 30 years, but blink and suddenly you are where we are with all of the journey and the great memories. But I find it absolutely extraordinary that you had no karting background, none of all of those learnings of wheel-to-wheel racing, all of the sort of sitting round the Barbie at a kart race weekend, watching the Grand Prix, studying where you would hope to be in the future. You sort of springboard in at a relatively, let's say, late stage in your life into cars. And I don't know whether that, Damon, makes you the best driver ever to have been in Formula One, or just a very good talent that didn't need all
just
that.
Stop there.
That
just
grounding.
Stop there.
Yeah, but how the hell did you and Jack manage to fill in the gaps? Because, if we look at someone like Kimi Räikkönen, another former teammate of mine, he did a bunch of karting since 2 years old. Did, I think, Formula Renault, went to Mugello to drive a Sauber F1 car, which Mugello, as you know, is a proper scary racetrack in anything, never mind an F1. Yeah. And suddenly he's in Formula One. And I go, how the hell did he do that with so little experience?
Yeah.
So how did you do it?
Well, obviously, you've got a much more natural talent than I ever had, because he just immediately shone. And that's the same with Max, isn't it? And certain drivers have got that ability to skip over the whole boring procedure of proving yourself. I don't know what happened. Somehow they just somehow convince people that they've got something magic, and in they go, like Kimi Antonelli, I suppose. But you're right. I floundered. I floundered for ages, trying to work out how this whole thing worked with four wheels and who the people were and all this stuff. I didn't have anyone guiding me. I was doing it on my own, really. I had people who helped me, but they basically just threw me in situations and I had to sink or swim. And so coming from bikes, I never really got it. Now, I'll tell you what, there was something that happened which lit a light bulb, and it was and this is an exclusive for your podcast here, David.
Thank you.
There was a thing called charity indoor karting events that was quite popular in the 80s, 1980s. And this is a new thing. Suddenly people would go and get a bus garage, a disused bus garage, and set up these indoor karting events, because it has to be indoors in England because it's pouring with rain all the time. But anyway, they're fun. But they made a track out of old tires, and the surface was incredibly smooth and slippery, and the karts couldn't really grip. But it was like racing a street circuit, because you had to get very close to the barriers, and I lost all my other drives. And so this was the only competitive opportunity I had. And there was a lot of other racing drivers who turned up. And I remember thinking, right, I haven't got anything else to drive at all. So this is it for me. I have to find out or prove to someone that I can drive. And it was an indoor karting event. And I learned something about how you drive a kart. And I think that was really key and crucial to me, because I suddenly penny dropped about how different a car was, and particularly karts have that fine level of, it's very quick. You've got to react very quickly, haven't you? And you kind of hustle it and all these things. And something clicked that helped me learn how to drive four wheels later on. And I definitely improved after that.
Yeah, the thing that I find also fascinating about that is that karting is very weight sensitive. As we know in Formula One at the highest level, 10 kilos is about 0.3 of a second, be a bit less than that in the lower formulas. But you were waif-like when you were a racer, but you're still 6 foot tall with, size 52 feet or whatever. So, how the hell did you overcome? All the way in the front. That is actually a good thing. But who you say you get help from people rather than sort of management? Is there anyone you would call out that you would say that stuck with you, other than your lovely wife Georgie? Who was it that stuck with you and gave you the constant guidance?
No, I'm going to offend people here because I can't. I mean, I have very good friends who were very good to me along the way and helped me, sometimes with a little bit of money to top up the budget and so forth. But I always felt terrible about getting people to do that. And I tried to pay them back when I got to the end and had some money, but they wouldn't take it. But so there was that kind of thing, which is the moral support, I suppose you call it, as well as financial. But as far as a management, I've never really had a manager. I employed a lawyer because the contracts were tricky and you need a good lawyer to do that. So I had famously had an Irish guy called Michael Breen, who was my manager, manager in the sense that he did the deals and the negotiating. But otherwise I spoke directly to the people involved. It's my phone, picking up the phone and speaking to whoever it was. And I came into contact quite a few times with Eddie on the way up with regarding my drive and his money. It's the way he looked at it. And so we got to know each other on that side of the fence as well, which was interesting. And I knew that you had to have your wits about you because there are drivers with budgets and they, what do they want? They want you or the budget. And so, you have to be a bit careful. You don't end up with no drive and losing your budget to someone else.
No, well, it's a fascinating and incredible journey, which I suspect, if I'm to try and put myself inside your mind a little bit, we find ourselves here at the later stages of our lives, reflecting back on what a journey. I never imagined I would be a Grand Prix driver. It sounds you had a little bit more sort of, okay, this is what I want to do. For me, it was just a hobby that became a career. I was as surprised as anyone that when I made it. That's
quite obvious to me anyway, David.
Yeah, I was just having a blast, wasn't I? Just absolutely. So it's been a hell of a ride, and that ride brings us to where we are here in Melbourne. And when we go way back,
the different. Yeah, just want to add to that, David, because actually, seriously, it was my only chance in life. That's how I saw my driving in F1. Was the only thing I was ever any good at. All my friends had got jobs, and I looked at them and they worked in advertising or whatever, and I just thought, I can't do that. I was useless at school. I just drifted through school, and it was a waste of money, a total waste of money. I shouldn't have gone. And and I just wanted to race bikes when I was younger, and so this was it for me, and I had to make it stick. And that's where that slight edge comes from, is the kind of refusal to be kicked out, which eventually I was, but I got old.
Yeah, but after a long career and some incredible victories along the way, one of which was here in Melbourne. We're both in Melbourne for the start of the Formula One season. Way back in 1996, the very first race of the championship in Melbourne, we'd finished up in Adelaide, which I think you won as well, did you not, after I crashed out?
You crashed. You gave me a Grand Prix, David. I can't believe it. I'm behind you. You're getting away from me. I'm thinking, I'm puffed out here. I don't know how he's doing this, but, you were quicker than me. And then you come into the pit lane and crash into the wall. I just think, what did you do that for?
Anyway, it's etched in my memory because it cost me significant amount of finance as well, which I'd only just started to pay off my debts, having my first full year.
You were leaving? Weren't you
I was leaving
that year anyway. You went anyway, so you've got a drive lined up.
Yeah,
but your new team boss. He just signed you up and you just crashed that up leading a Grand Prix coming in the pit lane. That was...
okay, well, stop rubbing it in. Stop rubbing it in. I think everyone understood I crashed. You don't have to say it three times.
I'm just saying, this is explaining to the listeners the way of the Formula One. This are the things that goes through people's minds is they have to make big decisions on drivers. And,
Well, so therefore, you topped and tailed. So you won the last race of 95 in Adelaide in, I guess, November. And then we were back here in 1996 in March. And you won that race. That was the race where, if you remember, our buddy Martin Brundle in the Jordan sort of rolled up over the back of me.
Yeah, 96.
Yeah, down at turn 3. And therefore, I did the restart in the spare car, and then the throttle, electronic throttle broke, so I never actually finished. But you went on to win the very first race here. So fond memories of Australia all round. It's been kind to you.
Very much. Yeah, I proudly claimed I was the only driver to have won consecutive back-to-back Grand Prix in the same country. I'm not sure it stands. There's this, as you know, the stats man will put me right on that somewhere, but it was amazing. End of one season, come back to the same country and win the first one of the next season. So it kicked off very well in Australia for me there.
We used to, in those days, the drivers would spend a bit more time in Australia. We had like 16 Grand Prix a season. We had more time. And you had, you were pals with Barry Sheen, Mick Doohan, I guess, as well. So you would hang out down here. So it wasn't just about coming to do a Grand Prix. It was a whole sort of, it was a busman's holiday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was also sometimes it was between when it was the first race. Obviously, you try and get here a bit early, but when it was the end of the season, there was a bit of a gap between Japan, wasn't there? So you'd come. Sometimes there was like a 2 week gap, so
Yeah.
people had time off. They went to Cairns and went scuba diving, Barrier Reef, all that stuff. So yes, there's a lot of temptation to stay down here. I mean, if it was the end of the season, I'm sure lots of people would just stay down here until Christmas and then go home. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's lots. And Melbourne's very different to Adelaide. The vibe is very different, probably because it's the first race rather than the last race. But it's also Adelaide's a smaller community, and so the F1 people coming into town took over the town, whereas in Melbourne it's a much more diverse place with lots going on.
Yeah, no, well, for all of our listeners who've never had the chance to come to Australia, it's definitely worth the 20-hour flight. I was in Sydney last week, which I hadn't been there for several years, but great and different feel altogether with the harbour there. And it's not that Melbourne isn't close to the water. We're right here on the Yarra River, which takes us out into the ocean, but it definitely has a different feel to it. But it's a great place to start the season. And you're going into this year, you're still gainfully employed and working with the Formula One circus. You've changed roles, but what is it that keeps you still wanting to be around Formula One? For me, I enjoy being at a racetrack, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that. I mean, I didn't used to like the paddock. I used to think it was a hostile place, and I would rather, as soon as I could, get out of it because I didn't like all the journalists asking you questions and and stuff like that. I wanted to. So with my career, I would say I would run a mile to lead. I just wanted to come in, do my engineering, and have a bit of laugh, and then leave. Now, I actually enjoy because we both have got this experience that we've accrued over too many years, and also relationships with people in the paddock that you enjoy seeing them. It's like the first day of term, isn't it? When you come to Melbourne, it's so weird. People have been away for the holidays, and then you come back, and they're all the same place, same people, and you kind of go. I feel like saying Happy New Year and stuff to people, but it's something interesting. There's the dynamics of it. It's always changing, but there's also something the same about it. So I was saying it's like in Mary Poppins. Uncle Bert says something's about to change, but it's all happened before, and everything has always happened before, isn't it? There's always something that's happening, but it's the same thing that happened before.
Yeah.
So
just for different people.
It is always, and of course the driving as well. And I'm really impressed with these drivers. I think they're amazing. I wouldn't want to be driving today because it's so much hard work. it's a lot, and also mentally they have to be quite on top of all this gadgetry they've got, and that would drive me mad, I think. But
I think we had a good era with the normally aspirated engines, and physically the cars were a bit quicker for the Grand Prix distance with refueling. So I've got no issue with the era that we raced. And yeah, of course, the passing of time. There's a lot of technology in these big, heavy F1 cars. But I do agree. I think that the drivers today they're so well prepared that they're simulated to within an inch of their life, aren't they, before they get here? And it was really interesting yesterday. Actually, I did a couple of events. One had Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen. Max, his typical chilled self, playing down slightly that they're not the favourites here, and that it might be difficult for them to get the opening result that they would like. Liam, to me, looked a little bit like a rabbit in the headlights. I think, the realisation of the challenge that he's about to undergo. And of course, as a Kiwi for him, there's going to be a lot of demands on his time here in Australia. And I know local networks have come over from New Zealand to cover this as well. And then the other person that I was at an event last night was with Lando Norris. And he was on stage chatting away in one of those fireside chats as a warm-up act for me to go on later, which I find quite funny. I took a photograph, actually, because he's on stage, but it's got an evening with David Coulthard written above him. But he spoke so openly, so engagingly, so he was absolutely brilliant. The way he engaged with the audience, with his honesty of what he learned last year and what he has to do this year, I'm going, I would vote for this guy to be Prime Minister. He's so believable.
Well, he's being honest, David, isn't he? That's why he's believable. You know, you can tell when someone's faking it. And I think that's a big problem with how do you become a Formula One driver? And I think but in the era before me, the people who drove were of a kind. They were very grumpy is probably one way of putting it. You know, they were kind of, they didn't like each other and they didn't like the people who they worked for, and they didn't like this, they didn't like that, and they'd get on the podium and they go like that. And then Michael Schumacher comes along and he gets on the podium, he's jumping up and down and smiling, and he changed the game completely. And that was called Flavio, because Flavio got him to kind of, you know, trained him to kind of like, we're in the winning business, okay? And of this lot, you're right, it's not just F1, it is their Gen Z or wherever they are. You know, they think about the world differently to the way we do in our stuffy old ways. And they're just brilliant. I mean, they're adept at media because everyone's got a mobile phone and they all understand that this is, you know, how you present yourself has results, has effects, and it can help your career. But they're not faking it. I mean, that's the truth. Lando, you're right. He's being sincere, he's being honest. I mean, Max is not happy larking about in the limelight, is he?
No.
And it's quite peculiar. I mean, I think Liam's also he hasn't struck me as someone, I've seen a few interviews, he's very serious, but he's being sincere. You know, he's being genuine. I think that's going to stand him in good stead. But you're right, stepping up into the limelight of a big team, there is a whole different planet there, you know?
Yeah.
Because now everyone is watching that bit. And you can be in F1 and no one can notice you. I mean, relatively. You know, you can have quite a good career in the middle. You see drivers going around, they're sort of stuck in the plug hole, the eddy of the middle of the grid, and they never get too much stress. And then you get in the top team, and it's not just the people in the paddock, it's your people at home, the whole media frenzy around, you know, so much hope invested in you and so forth.
Yeah, I just want to expand on that if I can, because I totally agree. There's a very different pressure when you've got a car that's capable of winning, and you get a number of drivers in the middle of the grid go, if I had that car, I'd show you just how good I am. And then they get an opportunity in a top car, and then it doesn't work for them. And then they drop back into the middle of the grid and do a good job. Now, at the risk of offending someone who was a great guy in F1.
Don't worry about that.
Then there was, like, Heinz-Harald Frentzen seemed to me someone that, brilliant sports car career alongside Michael with Mercedes, came into Formula One, did a great job at Jordan, winning Grand Prix, did a great job in Sauber in an underperforming car, got his chance at Williams, only won one Grand Prix and then got dropped. It's a very different pressure, isn't it, at the front where all eyes are on you?
Yeah, you really feel it. I mean, my career was very different because I did basically my first full season in Formula One was with Alain Prost in the winning car. So it was rabbit in the headlights stuff. You know, I was a test driver. I thought, I can do this. And then they sign you up and you go to the press conference, you suddenly go, oh my God, what have I got myself into? You know, and so that's when it all starts. And there's a whole nother dimension to being a professional in Formula One, or maybe in any sport. But you've got to be prepared, and they do prepare them better. I mean, I'm doing some stuff with a sponsor who's looking at helping young, a Williams sponsor is helping at young drivers. And so part of the program is to help them with media, to help them with understanding that they're going to be asked questions, and they've got to learn how to deal with it. Because, I mean, you could do the Kimi Räikkönen thing, which was give one-word answers. And that is a totally bona fide way of dealing with it. And he became one of the most popular drivers of all. And he never gave any controversial answers other than rude ones about what he was about to do with his bowels, you know, and
in Brazil.
and people loved him more for that, you know. But his sponsor's nightmare, you know, yes, not, you know.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Well, it seems like if we look at the grid going into this year, and let's quickly just go through and get the Damon Hill appraisal of what we may expect. It seems that McLaren are carrying good form off the back of winning the last race last year. Lando, as I mentioned, looks super chilled and up for the fight. If you were running through the usual suspects, give us your headline sort of feelings on McLaren, Red Bull. We've got to touch on Ferrari, of course. And then when you talk about young drivers and sponsors, there's an element of we could all father Kimi Antonelli as the youngest guy on the grid at 18 years old.
I like him because he recognised me when I met him the first time. He looked at me and he knew who I was.
Excellent.
I thought, oh my God, I exist. But we'll see how he gets on. He seems like I think if you can he would kind of fit the Valentino Rossi kind of mold. He looks like him, doesn't he? He looks like a motorcycle racer. And so he could be, he's got a very nice personality. I have no idea how to judge him as a driver. I've seen bits and bobs. I hear things, but I've never seen it happen. I mean, the opening lap he did in Monza, obviously famously, was blindingly fast, but ended in disaster. That's always that. Sometimes that can be a good sign. A lot of good drivers have crashed their way through the first, few races of their career, and then they've turned it down from 12 to 10, and they go super quick. Yeah. But so he's going to be interesting to watch. But Max is always there. You can't discount the guy. He's formidable. And if Red Bull haven't got the best car, he will make it the best car. A bit like Senna, And of course, you've got Lando and Oscar. Now, I keep doing this, but I keep discounting Oscar because I just think that Lando had the edge on him last year. I just think in races, but they were very, very close. There's nothing between they're both equally good, but you only need to miss out by hundredths, don't we? In this, the timing now is so, the margins are so small. And Lewis, have Ferrari got a car? I've heard some people suggest they could win the Constructors' Championship. They seem quite strong. Am I going through the whole grid here?
Absolutely. That's what I want you to do. No.
Yeah. So
well, you mentioned they could win the Constructors. Here's the thing, and they were close to winning the Constructors last year. I think it was like 14 points or something. But logically, if you can win the Constructors, you're winning races, or you're at least consistent.
Yeah.
So you've got to be then considered a championship contender.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's right. I mean, it is incredible. Don't forget, that's kind of false because Red Bull only had one guy scoring the points. So maybe actually they were, maybe McLaren and Ferrari were actually second and third in the Constructors' Championship if they'd had a more competitive teammate to Max. That may be in a false. I don't want to take anything away from McLaren. I think they did a fantastic job, and the car is clearly good. So, but it will be difficult to overhaul a beefed up. Let's say Liam Lawson gets up to speed and he's supporting Max in races a bit more closely. They will be taking a lot of points, won't they?
Yeah. So then let's give a little bit of love to Britain's, I guess, favourite I don't know if he's Britain's favourite, actually. He's certainly got the biggest following based on he's got 7 World Championships. But what we saw at F1 75 is McLaren are incredibly popular. And Lando, of course, has got such a nice way about him. And Oscar, of course, there's just not a side to him, is it? He just seems very uncomplicated. Yeah. But there's no question there will be a lot of the spotlight will be on Lewis. And he may well go and do a Nigel Mansell and win his first ever Grand Prix for Ferrari. And then he'll be, he'll really be considered quite good at that point, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's a good comparison, I think, because he's a big name and he puts pressure on Ferrari a little bit, with his name. And he's brought them so much kudos and attention and value just already without even doing a race yet, for them. So, but that's the story. And when you talk about big stories, there probably isn't a bigger story than Lewis Hamilton in Formula One. And now he's driving for Ferrari. The two biggest stories of all sort of collide. And Charles is in the background probably thinking, well, now I don't have so much heat on me. I could probably get on with my job and deliver some results for the team. But Lewis is a phenomenal talent. Has the phenomenal talent survived 40 years? That's going to be the question. Is inevitably it wanes a little bit, but you can't change someone's instinct, I don't think. And his instinct is to race. And once he gets in a race, I always think he's always better than everyone else, apart from maybe Max, in terms of speed. He just plows on, doesn't he? And it comes on the radio and goes, oh, it's all going wrong. A bit like Nigel, it's all going wrong.
Yeah.
And then it turns out he's pulled out in a stunning drive. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, actually, we got a little bit of insight last night when I was at the event, and there was one of the McLaren engineers was explaining that the analysis the teams do, they listen to all radio messages coming from the other teams, a little bit like, I guess, they would do during the World Wars, trying to decipher whether the drivers are in a good place or not. And apparently, Lewis is in the habit of saying to Bono, "Rear tires are gone, man," is to quote what was quoted last night. And then they found out relatively quickly that would mean he would do another 10 laps. So that actual sort of, the tires are done, wasn't a case that they were done, but in his professional opinion, he had at least another 10 laps, which is, done would maybe see you and I think, well, within the next 2 to 5 laps, we need to be coming in.
Yeah.
So this is the level that the teams are trying to sort of understand the little tells of
the language. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, sometimes we used to think that he was telling falsehoods, to try and put off the competition. But it turns out he was actually telling, a lot of the time, he's actually being honest. It's just Pete Bonington, his engineer, would know him well enough to know that we can get more out of him than even he knows. And I think that's a huge part of Lewis. Is I think he's still amazed about his own talent. I think he's actually, he still can't believe that he's got this talent, and it sometimes what's the word, underestimates himself. Which is a curious thing to be. But he's just got more talent than even he knows.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. Just to try and expand on that. What, given, 2 hands, 2 legs, a brain, and all the rest of it, what is it that makes someone like a Lewis or a Max, you experienced racing alongside Ayrton and Alain and Nigel, world champions all. What is it that is that last little thing? Is it the consistency of the speed? Is it the just getting on with it when you cannot keep adjusting the car? You've just got to go and deliver? I've never found it personally.
You had it, DC. Honestly, you did. You needed a bit more Jackie Stewart mind management, perhaps. But
yeah,
if you'd only listened to me, son, you'd have been better. But I think that I'm going to use an analogy, which is I think you've got to have an urge to win, a real overwhelming kind of almost psychotic need to win races, to win things. And that, I don't know where that comes from. That could be a personality thing. But then but behind that, you need to have some sort of processing power, which is extraordinary. So if it was like a computer, they have got an ability to process at that highest level more quickly, more cleanly, more consistently, the unfiltered raw information coming into their hippocampus or wherever it is, the amygdala or whatever, that is a better nerve system, synapse connectivity or whatever than other people. Because I've raced at that level, but I can't do it for very long. I can't do it all day long. And someone like Michael could do it all day long, or Senna, or Lewis and Max. They can do it all day long, and it's too exhausting. It's just too hard to keep that concentration up for that length of time for a mortal like me. So I think it's got to be something to do with the wiring, sort of innate wiring. Like, if you were looking for concert violinists, there's only very, very few. And there's hundreds of thousands of people who take up the violin and go to music school and stuff like that. But there's only one, Nigel Kennedy, that pops out of the blue somewhere. They just got a gift. That's what it is.
Yeah, they're just wired that little bit differently. I guess that is the great unexplained is the power of the brain. We can, test muscle strength, and we can do IQ tests. But when you mention Nigel Kennedy, whenever I've seen him be interviewed, he doesn't necessarily come across like he's the brightest bulb in the I'm going to get sued here, the brightest bulb in the box. But what an incredible performer when he gets the violin under his chin.
Yeah, now he's a bit of a rebel. He wanted to kind of be different, and he's stuck to his guns. But I think he's genuinely understood as having, people have carried on putting up with his eccentricities because of the performance, because of what he does. So, that is. I don't know why I picture Nigel Kennedy. It's kind of, but anyway, I listened to him once on the radio. Now I thought, this is an interesting guy. This is really interesting the way he's dealt with it, because very stuffy world. It's a bit like the classical music world is, they want it to be a certain way, and he just broke that mold, like Lewis has done. Lewis is coming. I'm not going to wear the boring clothes you make me wear. I'm going to do something different, and he's cracked it. He's cracked that mold, and he's opened the door for a lot of other people, have come into the sport now and felt like they want to express themselves differently to the way they should. You were a McLaren school guy. You know what it's like. Ron wanted you a certain way, didn't he? And it's a bit claustrophobic.
Yeah, it's like why, I had to shave every day and all that sort of thing, which is why when I suddenly popped into Red Bull, the revelation of being able to have stubble was, how basic is that? But it felt...
Yeah, I was just saying, the other guy that pops to mind, of course, is a famous Australian Finnish driver, Valtteri Bottas, who it's this alter ego has appeared whilst he's left Mercedes, and then it's fantastic. I mean, he's a talent. I mean, he's got such dry humor. It's fantastic. It's so funny.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been reborn, hasn't he? And then what a great choice by Mercedes to bring him back as a safety net, as a guiding light, if you like, for Kimi. Right, Damon, look, time is passing. I really appreciate that you've come on and supported us on FFS this early in the morning. Any closing thoughts, excitements ahead of the Formula One season? Who are we looking out for? Who's on Damon's watch list? Or has anyone made your shit list already?
Oh God, no, I'm not doing that. No, it's. Okay. I think, I think we're going to see the same. I think it's going to carry on from last year. It's not going to be too much difference in form. It's just tighter. So what we saw last year is going to be a repeat. Lots of wins being spread thinly around a lot of teams, and at the front in the top 4 or 5, maybe. I mean, Alpine is kind of they've been doing better, and they might be in the mix a little bit, which could be a bit of a surprise. But otherwise, a beefed up Red Bull team with Liam. I'm assuming that Liam's going to do a better job than Checo. I don't know what happened to Checo. He checked out. Checo checked out. So it's exciting. I think the big story, as I said, is Ferrari and Lewis. Could it be a dream season for him? And he's got that, 8th title that it should have been his and it wasn't. So there's that one more to go for. Could that happen? That's the biggest story, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it would be the perfect Hollywood story if it happens. And if anyone can make it happen, it's Lewis Hamilton. So it's going to be a hell of a year. So really appreciate, Damon, you coming on and helping out. I know EJ will appreciate your words. I've got to ask, because EJ likes to sign off with a bit of a growl. So if you were an animal, can you give us a little, what would be your sign off animal noise?
I'll never see this die if I do an animal impression on this. All right. Eddie does his growl. It's Eddie. Why did he do anyway, he does his growl, and the growl was much appreciated. And very Eddie, but I'm not gonna do an animal. I'll do a fish.
Okay, then give me your best fish impression.
I'm not doing the noise.
That's arousing.
I'm not doing. Very, very wrong.
All right,
David, down boy.
Down. Exactly. Well, Damon Hill, thank you very much for joining us here on FFS. And listeners, we'll be back next week. But until then, keep sending in your questions to ffs@whisper.tv and on social media at F1 for Success. That's bye from me. And, well, it's goodbye from Damon the Fish Hill.
You did that sign off brilliantly. I got that absolutely perfect. I can't do that. Remembering the kind of station identification thing I fluff it. But you picked this FFS thing, which is so hard to say.
It is difficult to say.
Thanks very much for having me. It's difficult to say, yeah. It's a tongue twister. But thanks for having us and lovely to chat, David. I'll see you out in the paddock later. And let's see what happens this year.
Absolutely. Thank you. All the best, Damon.